Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome back on the show.
We are back.
Yes, with another program.
Another weekly edition. Obviously, glad to have Sarah back with us today after her much missed absence last week. Although Chambers very much more than satisfactorily filled his
I think she was.
Sorry, guys, I was in Cambridge.
Yeah, I think Chambers actually was far superior to Assassin.
Wow.
We're actually in the process of maybe replacing her. Her contract's up for debate. That's
How upsetting, considering Shore is not the one that write the scripts for these.
Excuse me. Let's not get out of hand
Yeah.
now. There's no need to get hurt. We're all friends here.
Exactly. And speaking of friends, Shiraz, do you want to introduce our
Yeah, so we've got 2 guests this week, which is unheard of.
Five people on the show. We'll see how this,
I know.
this works.
It's going to be
out.
wild.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
So, do you want to introduce yourselves?
You go first.
Well, I'm Reilly. I'm the second token American for the radio show.
Need as many as we can.
True.
4th year here, studying international relations in the joint degree program with William and Mary. Just a fun time all around.
Very, very nice. Very nice.
My name's Jack. I'm
Hello,
third
Jack.
year. Thank you.
And this is Alcoholics Anonymous.
It's like, hello, ladies. I'm Jack. Oh, sorry. I'm
Single man, reveal yourself.
not single. Disclaimer.
He'd
He'd like everyone to know. Ladies, don't call in for that one.
I study history and IR as well, and excited to be here, guys. Thank you. For inviting us.
No, it's our pleasure.
So, do you want to give us a rundown of why you love history? What drew you to the subject in the first place? Why you see the value in
Because you
coming on
both
this
do
show?
history. Well, I guess you did it at William and Mary.
Yeah. I think history is just. I mean, it's the cliche thing, right? It's very important because you need to understand what's happened in the past to sort of know how to react to the events of the present. Really.
For sure.
Jack, what about you?
Got my girls.
Just the one girl, really.
Just the one.
all those 8 guys.
That's all he needed, though.
It was unreal. I guess I mean, as a show, you kind of watch Horrible Histories. That was a great show.
Oh,
Got into it like that.
classic.
See, we didn't have that, Riley.
And just as a kind of 8-year-old, you kind of like playing with soldiers and war. That kind of fascinated me, and then that's kind of permeated into other aspects of history.
Oh, that also puts us right into our topic for this week.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it leads us seamlessly.
Ooh,
through it.
thank you.
So I
Nicely
Reading
done.
the script well. There.
So I guess we'll start with our first segment, which is what happens this week in history. And a couple things happened. Probably none more significant than obviously what happened a short 4 hours ago, which was armistice was called on the Western Front.
100 years ago today, obviously, kind of overshadows everything else that happened.
It
This week.
It is going to be our the main theme of our show is going to be kind of centering around this whole topic, and we'll be getting more in depth into ideas about remembrance, talking about the whole poppies phenomenon and things like that. But other things did also happen this week as well, didn't they?
They
It's
did.
important to know, Shiraz. Do you want to...
Should I go first?
Sarah's actually.
I'll go
Oh,
first.
wait.
All right. So, what also happened this week is in 1938, Kristallnacht happened. That went down.
A really upbeat show.
Oh, I know. It's really
pouring with
positive
rain.
today.
It's grey. It's horrible.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know what Kristallnacht is, it was this thing in 1938.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a thing. I'm explaining. In 1938, where the windows and stores were broken into of Jewish-owned businesses in Germany. So it was I guess before the Holocaust, but it
Kind of a
sort
precursor,
of it was a
you'd
bit of a
say.
precursor. You could kind of tell where that was going. So not an upbeat one, but that did happen this week in history in 1938. So let's also remember that Remembrance Week.
Yes. And then you two have got a couple, haven't
Yeah, you guys have got some.
We thought of a few.
Please make sure they're a bit more.
So
enlightened.
upbeat, more certainly.
Those are
Bit
happier
more
than
positive,
mine.
Yeah.
1969, where Sesame Street debuted on TV.
Debut of Sesame
Well,
Street.
Yeah,
That was more of an
that's
American-
fun.
There we go. We'll run with that
There
one.
we go. That's a bit more upbeat than
Yeah.
Kristallnacht.
That is, yeah.
I've never actually watched Sesame
It's
Street.
a time and a half. I mean,
It
Big
is.
Bird and I were basically best friends. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but
Is that on British TV?
I don't know. It's a big American.
Never
It's
really
massive
watched
in
it.
America.
Yeah, it was. I
They-
strongly relate to Oscar the Grouch.
Snuffleupagus was also
Oh, yeah.
quite a character.
Yeah.
And now
Cookie
Sesame
Monster?
Street's all over
Big
the
mood.
all over the world. You know, they use
That's
them
true.
for
Yeah.
cultural
Yeah, they've
diplomacy
become-
of
yeah,
sorts.
so-
We was in the
Yeah.
Thanksgiving Day parade every year,
that-
which is a massive
Kind of a
deal
cultural
in the
icon
States.
almost now, yeah.
Cookie Monster, of course, relates to lots of issues around addiction.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Fully relate to the Cookie Monster.
Cookies Anonymous is a big part of the show.
Yeah.
For those of you who haven't seen it, at least.
Reilly, your turn.
Mine sort of takes us back to a little bit of a less cheerful thing, but in 1954 this week, Ellis Island closed. So, you know, it's sort of topical in a way.
So
with
for
all
those
the
who don't know what
immigration
Ellis Island is, you want to...
I don't know.
Jack.
I'm gonna tell Jack.
So
Glad you said it for me.
it was
Study history.
it was one of the entry points to the U.S. for
Like the big one.
yeah, like one of the largest. And
Have you never
most-
been on one of those New York ferry tours?
No.
Yeah.
Statue of Liberty,
Wow.
Ellis Island.
I
Yeah.
went when I was like 10 to visit
Yeah.
Ellis Island. It's
See?
weird. We had Angel Island off the coast in San Francisco, so we went there as like a school trip, and I boated there
But yeah,
one time
no,
with a
it
friend.
was obviously a place where these thousands of immigrants would kind of pile in, mainly from Europe, kind of get admitted into the country, sent on their way with new lives, new
Yeah.
lives, new
So this is
identities.
1954, wasn't
Yeah, my grandfather
Yeah,
went in there.
Well, I think obviously by that point it was far past its peak. But,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
we're talking sort of turn of the century here, really, aren't we? The late 18th, early 1900s.
it? So was it more symbolic than actually, you know...
No,
Well,
it,
no,
it
this was the closing of it was part of a sort of larger push for a more restrictive immigration policy in
Okay.
the U.S. And that's why I think it is a bit topical for U.S. politics.
It is.
today.
It's very topical for now.
No
Ellis
idea.
Island also wasn't that nice of a location. I feel like that
No.
should be specified.
And-
like
Well, it was
you could
more,
see
it was
the
more
Statue of
convenient.
Liberty,
it was more
but
convenient than anything in that it was in the harbor.
well, people would like get stacked up there for literally ages,
Yeah.
which is not ideal.
I'm learning as well as our thousands of listeners. Five.
Hey, let's not rub it in
Jack,
now.
no need. Like, that's the last time you come back on the show. Okay? Like, yeah.
Invite withdrawn.
If only we could send you to
Cancelled.
Ellis Island now. Go on.
It gets sent to Ellis Island at this rate. Yeah, so clearly a lot has happened this week, but obviously the overriding thing has been the centenary of the armistice that was signed 11th of November at 11 a.m. 1918. After 4 years of conflict that spans across the world, really. Not only just in Belgium, but also in Russia and parts of Africa. And there was fighting as far away as the Far East, with nations involved from all the continents in probably a war that was unlike any that had really been seen, certainly in terms of...
No, unprecedented.
yes, in terms of the
The mechanics, the
the
warfare, like the tactics used.
brutality of it, and also the futility to a degree. So that's really going to be our main topic on the show today. Is talking about World War One and its impact and some of the controversies that have arisen as such with the ideas about remembrance.
For sure.
So does anyone have any specific links to World War One in terms of family?
Well, I'm sure we all have relatives. I mean,
Yeah, my
certainly
mother's
speaking-
currently a serving officer in the British
Yeah.
Army. So kind of been surrounded by the army the whole of my life. Often, heard stories about like her having to. She's like obviously had to told families like who she served with that their sons or daughters have died in Afghanistan and Iraq.
She did that. That was the role that she had to do.
No, that wasn't the role, but like often, like, obviously, if you're because she's an officer, if someone below that she's
Okay.
in charge of dies,
Yeah.
so I had quite a close connection with the military.
And I think World War I too is probably one of the times, in terms of its impact on today, it was a very sensationalized event that I don't know if I wouldn't categorically say that it was one of the first times that a war had been commercialized, but I think just in terms of everything that we have left to look at the war with, it sort of brought war into the minds of the people more than any other conflict, I think, prior to it.
Yeah, I think wars clearly do, within like public mindsets, they certainly become embroiled. I mean, certainly in Britain, the Boer War became a real subject of political. That was used a lot, but nothing on this scale. And I think clearly a part of that was civilian casualties, which obviously we'll get into.
That was the
more.
first
Well, I think-
kind of total war.
Yeah, it was total war, and so civilians were being affected, which meant that towns were being blown up, or like they saw soldiers, and I think it was very different in that sense that so many people were involved, either because most people probably had family members or friends that they knew that died in the war, at least in Europe. The States, obviously, we weren't that involved in that one. We did pull up eventually, but it took our time.
Get late to the party.
I know, we were late to the party. But like it was just such a big war, and I think so many things sparked from it. Like, arguably, you could say that the rise of the Soviet Union had to do with the World War One.
Certainly Nazism.
Certainly Nazism.
Fascism
Well, I
in
think
Italy
that
as
was
well.
more as
Fascism
as a
and, like,
result of
Mussolini.
What happened afterwards with the Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah. Whereas I think the same thing kind of happened in Russia,
I
where
think certainly it's directly linked to the rise of communism. The
Yeah.
way in
I
which
think
the Russian
it's-
economy worked in the war. It's kind of focusing the decisions made by the Tsar.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Certainly in Italy as well. I guess the thing you were talking there about the impact that, and where it all kind of comes back, I think in terms of places where you're going to feel that the most certainly is, where we all live right now in Scotland. There is no doubt in my mind that there is not a single town, there's not a single village across the entire length of the country in Scotland where there isn't a memorial, and that's because every single town lost someone during the war. And I don't mean that as a generalization. Every single town.
But it's
Yeah.
the same in England. You go to every village.
There are
memorials.
There are a couple in England. They're called, I think, the Thankfuls. Just reading this up. They're towns
in which
everyone came back. And then there's also towns called the Double Thankfuls, where everyone who went out in both World War One and World War Two,
Wow.
but every single person came back.
I can't
Just
imagine.
move them.
Can't
So
imagine.
there's about 13 of them, I think, in total. These double thankful villages.
Probably more than I was expecting.
In Scotland, none. There's none.
Wow.
Every single town lost it. So the impact certainly was unlike any before from a civilian perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it's also been really interesting for me, and I think Rai, you can probably comment on this, is that coming over from the States, like I obviously learned a lot about it in school because like we studied the French side and like the trenches and all that kind of stuff, but we never really focused on it. Like it was not a big thing when Remembrance Day came around. Like we have, I think it's Memorial Day, Veterans Day. That's I always get them confused. It's the same day, but it's also my dad's birthday. But it was never like a big thing. Like we just kind of lumped them all together. For Veterans Day, it's not like a big Remembrance Day where we talk about World War One. There's not really the wearing of the poppies that I've ever seen. Like it was coming over here and seeing all the memorials and seeing all the poppies. It sort of, I think you see the impact of the war here in a very different way than you do in the States. In the States, we're much more invested in World War II, whereas I think that's probably for us, it was like our big war. And for you guys over here, I think World War One had that sort of initial wow impact that World War II had for us.
I think we still do celebrate World War II a lot. I mean, Churchill, obviously, and Darkest Hour, Dunkirk have obviously just come out in cinemas. It's still venerated, but I think the difference between the two, obviously, is sort of the black and white aspect of World War II as opposed to World War One.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a clear kind of good and evil in World War II, I suppose you can say, on a very basic level. You know, the fight against fascism, Nazism, like that kind of thing. Whereas World War One, it's a bit more blurred, isn't it? You have to say.
It's completely.
But I think even the black and white aspect, like which you mentioned, there's what's the guy, the Lord of the Rings actor? What's his name?
James Cameron? No.
No.
Peter Jackson.
Peter Jackson. There we go.
Yeah, there we
He
go.
just
Yeah.
makes a film about like where he's coloured a load of World War One films.
Yes.
And like even that aspect, like we just think of the First World War as this like black and white war in the very literal
Well,
sense.
it must make it a lot more relatable.
Yeah, and it does, and it's just bizarre how like everything that we come across is in black and white, and that sort of element's quite interesting.
And these are all guys that were, in most cases, younger than us as well. You know, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. You know, it's worth noting. Maybe had we been born 100 years ago, we probably wouldn't be alive by now.
Well,
Yeah,
that's-
well, I think
Like-
the age of these soldiers is partly why it's so venerated as an event. It's because it's just this
It's
guilt.
a whole generation
guilt
really,
Yeah.
of young
of, like,
men.
contemporary
that-
society
yeah.
just feels about just sending these boys off
Yeah.
and just and just killing them.
And that's the thing that you clearly see a lot in things like Blackadder,
Yeah.
right? Because the idea in Blackadder is this concept of lions led by donkeys.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is the idea that the British soldier fought with a great degree of courage in the face of adversity and put up with these horrendous conditions,
Yeah.
terrible conditions for 4 years, and their commanders, so for example, Sir Douglas Haig and people like that, are often portrayed as donkeys, as in they had complete disinterest in
Well, they're kind of
casualties
figures
and
of
loss.
old wars, if you know what I mean. They had no kind of
They didn't adapt.
appreciation. Yeah.
And they just essentially threw them off.
Yeah, even Churchill as well, like the Gallipoli in
Yeah,
was
yeah.
that
I
1916,
mean,
1917.
everyone conveniently forgets that. But,
Yeah, like he messed up like the idea that all the generals and all the officers just messed up the timings on their watches, and so the artillery strike didn't coincide perfectly with the soldiers landing on the beaches.
Yeah, well,
and that was
that's
essentially
that's
what
the one
messed
that's
up.
particularly sort of marked in
Yeah.
Australia and New Zealand. They had huge losses
Anzac,
in
yeah.
those
Well,
Anzac, yeah.
And that's a point too, just the number of different sort of nations involved in this conflict, even just from the British side.
Well, yeah, but like you think about an Australian, say, imagine you're an Australian going over to fight in France. Like, how is that relevant to you? Like, in what
Or
way?
if you're a Gurkha.
or a Canadian, anyone, literally any one of those kind of dominions of empire at the time that went over to the Somme or
I mean, Pacific Islanders,
Vimy Ridge, or
even, it really
Indians,
was such a cross
Caribbeans, yeah.
And I think it also shaped the generation that would participate in World War II in a really deep way. I mean, look at Churchill, he fought in Gallipoli, and I think a lot of Churchill's moves later in life were sort of that chip on his shoulder from Gallipoli and from what happened there. And I think it was a war that really affected everyone. I mean, in France, at least, they had I think it was General Pétain, was sort of the big guy that won World War I, and so they put him in power. And the guy just folded to the Nazis.
Well, he led Vichy France. Didn't
Yeah, he did. But everyone was sort of like, oh, okay, but he was a hero from World War One, so therefore he definitely knows what he's doing.
he? Yeah, he was in command at Verdun, wasn't he?
Yeah,
I think.
he
Yeah,
was.
a very nasty battle between the French and Germans in particular.
Have you been to any of the World War One memorials?
I've been to the Somme a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went on a school trip.
Even that aspect, like, a lot of British schools, at least English schools, I know, like, everyone kind of like year 9 or year 10, you go, or GCSEs, like, you go over to Ypres or you go to the Somme and go to these, like, memorials.
But I think it's crucial that
Yeah.
these young people learn about this kind
Crucial
of
to
thing.
what?
Just for their own development
Yeah.
and kind of avoiding a repeat of, like, because obviously we're getting further and further away now from the war, you know. Obviously, there's no one left anymore who can remember World War One. Obviously, you've got very few World War Two veterans. But, you know, I think it's important not to forget these mistakes
So
that were
do
made.
you never forget? Is like, which is kind of like, lest we forget. Like, should we like we're taught forgive and forget? So do we just like? Is there a point?
Forgive, obviously, but I think to forget the lessons that were learned and the industrial killing that took place would be incredibly risky.
So we remember this for the rest of our life, like for forever.
I would say
Because there is a point.
I'd say it's also crucial to remember and sort of commemorate the lives lost as well, the people who, you know, gave their lives to allow us to sit here now and, you know, make this radio show and study without
But we
fear
don't do that for like author. Like we don't remember.
Well,
that, like,
well, you take, for example, Agincourt, or, I mean, probably more relevantly, the 30 Years War, which is statistically the most violent conflict that ever took place on
Well, I
European.
think there wasn't really a British involvement in the 30 Years War.
Well, yeah, of course, but I mean, do Austrians or the Germans think back as like, well, lest we forget this conflict in which religious divide tore us apart.
And also, I mean, the notion of countries was less defined in that stage. It was all a bit kind of wishy-washy. I mean, I'm no expert on the 30 Years War, but
Well, I think also for a lot of people, it felt like a pointless war.
that's also
Not in the sense that like Vietnam did in the U.S., because that was much more people were violently against it. But war for that generation was so seen as something like beautiful and heroic, and you know, you died fighting on the battlefield, and you had people like Hemingway who were just sort of like, that's all wrong, like you don't understand. But it was the first war that had gone on for so long that no one thought would. Like everyone thought it would be over by Christmas, and it was literally just like all these countries. Like if you read The Sleepwalkers, which is a book about the lead up to World War One,
it's a very good book.
it's a very good book. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's literally just a build up of how like the war could have been prevented so many times.
I think the thing was,
So many people had agendas.
there hadn't been a war in Europe since 1870. It was the longest
It
period
was like
of peace
Bismarck,
actually on the
yeah.
European continent up until that point. And so you had this whole generation who kind of grew up, I don't think really kind of knowing what war was like. They'd also been told stories about how heroic it was, and
It was just
you know,
over glorified.
well, yeah, and that I think that's shown in kind of the kind of how it was viewed when it broke out, when war broke out. It was almost celebrated in some.
Well, you
some
read
parts.
the diaries; they're not thinking, I must go off to war to stop Germans gaining ports on the English
Yeah.
Channel.
These
It was
Yeah.
more just a nationalist kind of.
It was sort of like we're gonna. I mean,
Sentiment
everyone had
that
different
had been
interests in
drilled
it.
into them.
Like Russia's interest in it was literally because they've been embarrassed with Japan, and they were like, oh well, we need to prove ourselves. And the Tsar saw it as like a way to consolidate his power, and he was like, oh, it's okay, like things are going well, but if we declare a
Yeah.
war and win, then our nationalist pride is going to cement us
Or
in this.
prevent revolution.
So I think this like kind of like
Yeah.
high political focus is like should we also be talking about like why are these soldiers fighting? Like how do you make soldiers who have no like you say like you were saying earlier about these Australians? How do you make them fight? And they're fighting.
That's, I think
soldiers
because
at least
honestly, I think
fighting
at least
because they're next to
the
the
ones at the
clients.
start had this kind of nationalist kind of
Yeah.
propaganda drilled into them,
Well-
and
they thought, like, it was-
no, they were led to believe that like there is nothing more honourable. What dulce et decorum est,
Perpetuum
mori,
mori.
like yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like you know, well, it was
It's
that. Was
a
that
noble thing to die
Yeah.
for your
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And it's like that is a recurring theme in every conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
That has, I mean, occurred since. You either give it human rights language or you give it some sort of this is your noble mission. And it might be getting ahead of the show, but just the way, like going to these memorials and like you said, Harry, everyone should remember. But what are we remembering?
Yeah.
You know,
well, no,
are we
I think certainly
remembering-
World War One shattered that kind of that idea of
It just made wars seem so
fighting
much
for
more
your country
gruesome.
for the sake of it. Like I mean, there wasn't
Like, and
there
it's
was,
not
there was
even-
no reason.
it's
Well,
not-
it was also a very different war because they were just stuck in trenches. Is that it wasn't?
That's-
It not only wasn't the fact that it wasn't as glorious as everyone thought it was, but it went on forever. And
Yeah, no, it
where
wasn't-
was the
it wasn't
glory?
like-
There was just no man's land. Like they were literally just trapped in trenches. And I think for a lot of people, and I keep going back to Hemingway because Farewell to Arms, but it's just sort of like they were like, "What are we doing? Like this is not what we were taught to believe war is. Like who are we even fighting?
All
we're
quiet on
we're
the
just
Western Front from the
yeah.
German side.
Like they were like, we're just pointing guns at people from miles away, and we can't go in the middle because we'll get blown up.
And it completely changed the game. You know, back in the day, obviously, you know, you had battles. You know, probably over in about a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you could really, you would see by the end of the war, you could have been dead.
could tell
whatever,
who
but
won.
You could tell who won, and you could there was something tangible there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was what fed in afterwards. This idea of Germany was never invaded, but what lost terribly.
Mm-hmm.
I guess
Well, I think arguably France were the big losers, even though they won.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Yeah, but
the
they
loss
got
of a generation.
Alsace-Lorraine back, and oof, that was what they
The loss
wanted.
of like what 1.8 million men was it?
Yeah.
Ridiculous. And then they're just also just the complete destruction of infrastructure. And,
So
you
many
know,
French
livelihoods.
towns.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
the thing that really stands out for me is that I remember studying for a World War One test, and like in the garden at home, and my granddad, who I lived with at the time, like, he came out. He was asking me about it, and he asked me why it started. And so I kind of explained like what I had literally
John
been
Green
learning,
video, anyone?
like literally what I had been studying that day, what I had been studying, and he just no sense to him at all. He could not understand why his dad had to go off, leave his university medicine career, go
Yeah.
off and get shot in the leg, and then come home. It didn't make any sense to him.
Did he
Anything
get
that I
shot
said.
or was he a deserter? Did he shoot?
No, he
Well, that's
he
a
stu-
fact. God.
he studied Sanskrit at Aberdeen University and was one of the first territorial battalions.
Oh, yeah.
So, which were groups of schoolboys who went off, and their first battle was the Somme. 26,000
Jesus.
casualties in a day.
Well, yeah, it was 20,000 deaths or something
In
the
a
first-
day. Worst in
1st
British
of July
history.
2006.
And
1916.
in, I think at Passchendaele, he was shot in the fibula. So obviously he had to go home. And then there he recovered and missed the rest of the war. So ultimately it saved his life.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I think he might have
Yeah,
been
so
one of the lucky ones.
it-
There.
Yep.
But obviously he would have had lifelong injuries.
Well, subsequently he took up a career in medicine and travelled
Okay.
about. But so for him, so obviously his granddad grew up with that.
No, yeah.
So for him, it was very much like, why did he have to go through all that?
Why? It was just such
Yeah.
a waste. I mean, I was reading. I know again, trivial. I hate to bring sport into this. You know, that was all last week's episode.
Every
but that
week.
was, did you read that BBC piece on the footballers who went off to war and you know the huge loss of life, the needless loss of life, the hundreds of them that died, and you know threw away you know these great careers, and you know, even the ones that were injured so could never play again. And
Well, I
it's-
think
it's very
also,
sad.
did you guys ever see? We watched this in my high school class, and I brought it up because I read an article about it, so I had the whole class watch it. But it was like a Sainsbury's advert, weirdly enough, and it came out, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, where it was all about that football match that they played.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a myth.
yeah,
That-
where
that
they-
never actually really was. Yeah, that's
No.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of glorified in history. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, but it has been glorified in history that, like, you know, they paused it and played a little cheeky Christmas football match.
I think one of the things that really stands out to me as well is this is one of those wars where it kind of probably always has been the case, but the people that died for this war were not the people that benefited from this war.
Absolutely.
You know,
No.
like they did not come from the families that were driving these conflicts in any country, and then
Yeah,
to-
well, it goes to show that with the football, like,
Yeah.
they had no reason to
Yeah,
hate
exactly.
each other.
Like, they didn't
were
hate
brothers,
each
you know?
other.
Yeah.
They were just sort of like, okay, well,
They
we've
were
been
just on the
told
wrong
to
side of
stand and
history.
fire.
Yeah.
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 I mean, and I think that's also an interesting commentary on the human mindset at that point, that these men were told to stand and fire at people that they didn't know. They didn't really know why they were fighting the conflict, but they were like, all right, well, sure, if that'll bring us glory, like, we're there.
Yeah.
We're going.
Does that change?
it certainly dispels any notion of the gentlemanly conflict of,
Oh, no,
of
yeah.
yesteryear. Of,
Yeah,
you know,
kind of
the
a
gentleman
conduct of
knight
war, then, yeah.
going
Yeah.
against the
Yeah.
gentleman knight. Yeah.
And
Chivalry,
with,
yeah.
and with that idea in hand, it's time now for our song of the week, which is it is pertinent to this show in most ways. Obviously, I'll go into more detail afterwards, but for now, everyone enjoy this song. Okay, so for those who do not know, that was Amazing Grace. Now,
Yeah.
so that in itself is a song with a lot of history and is kind of relevant to this event. So initially, it was a Christian hymn by a former slave trade ship captain called John
Yikes.
Newton in 1779. So immediately, we're starting. Apparently, he was shipwrecked and he prayed to God.
Well, but he was a
About-
slave. He was a slave owner. He was a slave.
Slave.
Trader.
No, he.
Slave- oh.
He would bring them over from Africa.
He just
God.
captained the ship.
So
So
I think that's
he ran aground off Ireland, and in this moment of desperation, prayed out to God and was spared. So we have these ideas of forgiveness.
sounds like
and,
it deserves staying. To be honest with you, God.
well, I
Wow.
hear it out. So
Kind
there
of,
was.
kind of ruined the song for me. Actually.
So
You didn't know that.
no, I didn't know he was a slave.
We even
trader.
learned that in
God.
church.
Yeah.
Apparently, it was
my youth
like
in church.
it was compulsory, the job he was doing. So ideas of forgiveness and redemption, regardless of sin, are ideas that come out of this song, as well as like mercy of God for salvation. So obviously, the song is highly significant in contemporary culture. It was part of the Second Great Awakening in the United States, which is to do with Protestantism and Methodists, I believe. And it also was a song that became synonymous with the idea of Martin Luther King Day and civil rights.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And this version that you've heard now is by the Royal Scots Dragoon Guard, which is like one of the regiments in the British Army, and this was released in 1972. It actually reached #1 in the UK at the time it was released. And since now, due to like the secularization of the song, almost it's now used more in terms of memorial and typically at funerals as well. So it's a song that has a lot of history and is kind of pertinent to this event now. But in terms of remembrance, however, obviously the big thing recently has been, to turn our attention slightly, has been poppies. Now, obviously, the poppy, for those who don't know, is this little symbol that people can decide to wear, and it harks back to a poem by Wilfred Owen, I believe,
yeah.
in Flanders Fields, which alludes to poppies on the graves of soldiers.
Yeah.
Since then, a debate has arisen about its use and what it has come to symbolize. So the typical poppy is the red poppy,
Yeah.
which is generally alludes to military personnel, typically British personnel, and has become controversial for its misuse occasionally. Well, not necessarily misuse, but has drawn a lot of flack from people. For example, David Cameron wore a poppy in China, where the poppy is synonymous with opium and the Opium Wars. And then in Northern Ireland, the red poppy is synonymous with the idea of Britishness.
Yeah.
And obviously James McLean, the
Quite
footballer
toxic,
who doesn't
yeah.
wear it. And along with that, though, 12 years after the war ended, something called the white poppy, so this was 1933, I believe, the white poppy was started to being handed out. And the white poppy, correct me if I'm wrong, it alludes to ideas of not only of remembrance of the dead, but also an inclusion of civilian casualties, and also with this further ideal of an end to all war.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, these two, what seems that on the surface, something about freedom of choice has, I don't want to say hijacked, but it's become very controversial, and it comes up every year. People talk about it, sort of the white poppy deferring away support to veterans and being attention-seeking and somehow disrespectful to the armed forces, whereas others are asking, or is it merely, or is the red poppy a glorification of conflict, and the white poppy merely encompasses aspects such as calling for an end to all war and civilian casualties? And needless to say, I think that's a general summary of it. Feel free to add if there's anything else in there.
When Reilly wanted us all to mention that none of the 5 of us are currently wearing poppies.
I did wear one.
Though I should also mention
it doesn't fit well on
I
my current coat.
I didn't know about the whole poppy thing until I came over here.
It's a
I
huge
just hadn't
deal.
heard about it.
But I certainly lament, as Shura said, how poisonous the debate has become. The fact that people will get slammed for not wearing one for very, very noble reasons somehow. But then the idea that wearing one, as you said, maybe glorifying the military, whatever. I think it's not the people that they died. The people who went to the Somme or wherever or World War II, they died for a freedom of choice. I think by and large, and to see this kind of poisonous kind of rhetoric, the poisonous debate that's kind of spilled out from it, I think is a real shame. Yeah.
Do you think so? Is any debate that poison? Well, no.
I think it has. It has become.
Do you think? I think it's introducing important questions about, because ultimately, first of all, it should be mentioned the poppy is unique, like kind of distinctly British. Like in its focus, the Royal British Legion says this is a specifically British remembrance.
Yeah.
That instantly evokes some sort of like, if we're only remembering British soldiers, like soldiers first of all, what about civilians? And then also just like, should we be remembering like German soldiers, like French soldiers, like
members of the empire?
This
there is
uniquely British focus leads to this like intense, like nationalised discourse, which I ultimately don't. Well, it's a political project, and this whole thing about the poppy's like neutral. It's just remembering war dead. It's just
sadly, it's not
become so political. Yeah. It's unbelievable. Like anything to do with war is political. It's the most political thing that you can do.
It's difficult though, because obviously you have politicians who say, or engaging in discourse about the poppies, like, it's this, that, or whatever.
Yeah.
For people who ultimately wear it, for them, they're donating they're donating to a charity at the end of the day.
That's all I see it
towards the veterans, and I don't think necessarily like is anyone who wears a poppy making a political statement, or are they just doing what they do every year?
I think that's
See, but the problem with sort of absolving people of this political statement that they may or may not be consciously making is that to wear a red poppy is to be taken as a part of a particular discourse on what remembrance should look like and on what remembrance should do. It's to say, as to Jack's point, it's a very nationalistic perception of how to remember, and it's a very nationalistic perception of what remembrance actually looks like. It's to me, as coming from the outside, coming from a nation that by all rights is very nationalistic and has a very particular nationalism that has made it a particularly bad actor in many instances across the world, to come here and then see it is ubiquitous. It really is. You can't walk down the street without seeing.
It's true. I suppose we've grown up with it, so it's just normal to us. But I can see how as an outsider it might look maybe somewhat imposing. I don't
even think, for me, it's not even imposing. For me, it's always felt like, as an American, if I had one, it sort of feels like, because it's such British culture, it feels like you're sort of like appropriate, like you're taking it. Like we don't talk about World War I as much in the States. So if I'm buying a poppy and I'm remembering British soldiers that I never studied, why am I buying it? Like, am I wearing one because everyone else is wearing one, and then I'm being told I have to?
Well, you shouldn't be. It should be a choice. Firstly, you shouldn't have to be told.
But is it really like?
No, that's what I say.
Jon Snow a few years ago, I know, didn't wear a poppy. And he called it kind of like poppy fascism, because he's sent all of these like emblems, like symbols, and he supposedly has to wear them, and so he was making that choice. But American attitude towards remembrance quite generally is a lot more muted, and I know following in Afghanistan and Iraq, whereas like the whole Wootton Bassett thing in the UK, where the town, like whenever we had deaths in Iraq or Afghanistan, there's that town in it's by RAF Brighton Norton. And they paraded them through the whole Wootton Bassett thing. So it's like the repatriation of soldiers. Whereas in America, Bush banned it. So there's no repatriation route. You couldn't. It was like the Dover case, I think it was. So like Americans don't repatriate their soldiers at all, whereas like for the Brits, it was a massive thing, and it became this icon of remembrance, which I guess is completely relevant to today.
We have Veterans Day. Like we kind of lump them all into one, and they're like, yes, veterans. Like it's just sort of like, it's not World War I distinct. It's not World War II distinct. It's not Vietnam distinct. Like it is sort of.
Yeah.
So the problem with the Northern Irish question is because the poppy is technically meant to remember all British war dead, regardless of conflict, and that is where, for people from Northern Ireland,
Because obviously you had those dying in the Troubles.
Yeah.
so in the Troubles, in the
Arguably seen as
IRA,
oppressing Ireland,
British
yeah.
soldiers, the incidents of civilian casualties, and for some people, they cannot wear the poppy because for them, the idea of the British soldiery is not,
Them.
one of acts of sacrifice and remembrance, but a completely different and very negative image.
Yeah.
So the poppy isn't necessarily just World War One. Obviously, it all leads up to the 11th of November, but I think it technically symbolizes, and it obviously
Well,
starts out of
it
World
does,
War
yeah,
One.
officially it is.
But officially, it also remembers people from World War II, all the conflicts that have happened in the 20th century.
I think it's natural.
Iraq
There's been
and
a lot
Iraq
more focus on
and
World War One in
Afghanistan.
recent years. What with the end of 100
Well, the
years.
centenary, of course, has
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
massive attention on it.
Well, I think too that brings it back to sort of the red poppy's inception, and the red poppy was initially, it came with the slogan of "Never Again," and you don't see that anymore.
No.
You know,
No.
that "Never Again" is not something. It is not a mantra like "Lest we forget"
It's
is.
never forget, not never again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
sort of
there
changed.
is a very big difference between
Yeah.
never forget and never again, because never again has been completely set aside. I mean,
That's- yeah.
the amount of conflicts that the UK has been engaged in since World War One is
And almost
And
almost
big
kind of
conflicts.
almost using World War One as justification, like World War One, like these soldiers would died and fought for our freedom. Like now, look, we're being like challenged again. We have to fight again and again and again. And so, like World War One becomes this sort of justification for ongoing.
I think
conflicts,
there's
which are
a-
far,
It's
far
been
messier.
manipulated.
There is a
but,
bit
yeah.
of nuance. I think World War One is more about the futility of the conflict, whereas World War Two is more about the sacrificial aspect of it. Because
World War II is much more like they kind of had to.
because that is more Battle of Britain,
Yeah.
enemy at the gates.
Yeah, I
Whereas
think-
They were attacked, yeah.
World War One is boys going off to die for no cause at all.
Yeah.
There
Yeah,
is-
I mean,
there is a
Britain
bit of
wasn't
distinction.
under a direct threat.
No.
Like, I mean, obviously there are a few bombing raids and stuff in World War One, but I mean,
Zeppelins.
com-
But they got
compared
involved
to-
because Belgium, like,
I mean,
Yeah, they got dragged into it because of the Triple Entente, with France and
Yeah.
Russia. Like,
But the thing is, though, we're engaging in this conversation. We in this room are talking about why did World War One happen? What were the effects of that? But when you allow sort of the feelings and the remembrance of that conflict to be distilled down into a single symbol, you completely wash over any nuance, and it becomes a black and white. It
does,
becomes
yeah.
you must remember the dead. We're not going to interrogate the reasons that these people went to war. We're not going to interrogate how they died, why they died, when they died, and for what they died.
I think
And
that's the real shame. It's,
Like,
it's
what
all
is
about
the
personal
poppy for?
choice.
Like-
I'm always going to wear a poppy. I feel it's crucial to remember their sacrifice.
Yeah.
But if
But
you
it's
if you don't want to, if you want to wear a white poppy, whatever, like, I'm not gonna judge you for that. Like, it's again free
If
country.
anything,
like,
it's for me at least, it's because I have family who fought in that conflict.
yeah, same. It's
So,
a personally very relevant.
I don't
yeah.
think I don't think I could necessarily not wear it otherwise. And obviously, I've grown up in this in the country, and I don't know. Like, to be honest, until 2 years ago, I'd never heard of the white poppy. Even though
I'll
it's
be
been,
I didn't hear it till last
even though
week.
it's been
It was
around
all just
since
red poppies, like,
1933.
yeah.
Yeah.
Never
But that's
heard.
part of the problem. It's this like singular discourse, this singular story about war, quite generally, which is damaging, and that's what the white poppy is kind of contributing to, opening up discussion.
Yeah, well, and sadly,
Even-
but there's still a lot of stigma, sadly, attached to the white poppy.
Even just the idea of silence, like a minute of silence, it's quite powerful as a kind of symbol of just there's one storyline, stick to it, be silent now. Like this is what you have to. This is what you have to think. You have to honor the dead, or else you're not a part of Britain as a nation.
That's,
and then
that's
you
where
fall
it gets
silent.
very dicey.
And
That's
then you
like-
fall silent. And like that's a powerful image. Like for a lot of people, it's like the entire nation supposedly falling. And you hear it and you see it in the newspapers. The entire nation falling silent. The entire nation doesn't fall silent. The
Yeah.
country doesn't fall silent at 11 o'clock. But that that kind of. And that's where like newspapers and media comes into it because they're the ones benefiting from war
Well,
ultimately.
this is
Yeah,
well, that's
well,
the fundamental.
Gets
Yeah.
That's the
so
fundamental.
edgy, and it's great.
Well, that's the
So
fundamental.
I don't know if it's great, but
No,
yeah.
not
Yeah,
great,
Well, that's the
probably,
fundamental
but
issue. Is it's
interesting.
who benefits from the proliferation of the red poppy as opposed to other.
Well, sadly, I believe it's nationalist far
Yeah, it's
right groups
nationalist stuff.
who have kind of hijacked the whole poppy debate as a single black or white, us versus them. You either wear it or you hate Britain. Like,
See, I
Yeah.
don't think it's the far right groups. Though. It's all political parties. It's every politician.
You read it in the Telegraph, and
Like-
relatively minor MPs all over Twitter. Just, I will wear my poppy with pride today.
Yeah. What's his
Yeah.
name? I did. Johnny Mercer, MP for Plymouth,
Oh,
who
that was
incidentally,
quite a tweet.
who incidentally claims a lot for expenses for renting out hotels in
what
London.
did he say? I haven't read this, but yeah.
There was a debate on Good Morning Britain, and there was a guy who was wearing a white poppy, and so he
Okay, yeah, I
basically
saw this.
tweeted saying white poppies are attention-seeking rubbish. And it's
Again, it's trying to
contributing
shut
this
down
unitary-
debate, like,
yeah,
yeah,
it's shutting down debate, trying to promote this unitary, single-dimension storyline,
I
which
think
for anything isn't.
It's also just like a thing of belonging, almost. Like when you wear it, you're like, ta-da! Like I am part of British national. Like I
Yes,
belong
yes.
here.
No, it's true.
Like
It
that
is.
kind of thing, and you feel out of it. Like I'm an American, so I don't really feel like I should wear one.
Exactly.
But you're walking down the street, like every
It's
single
true.
person
and
is
it's
wearing
been
one.
hammered into us from a young age. I mean, I don't know if you guys know. We always had a massive remembrance service
Yeah.
at my school.
Yeah.
Everyone was
Yeah.
like, the whole
See, we
school would get
didn't.
out on the front lawn, 2-minute silence. The CCF would be there. They would all be marching. I remember I did it a few years.
Yeah.
Like, there's this massive memorial in our
everyone wearing
in our
What's-
chapel
what's
as
so
well. There's
interesting
this
is-
massive memorial, over 100 boys, ex-boys who went off to war,
course,
World
yeah,
One and
yeah.
World War Two, who died.
Yeah.
You know.
But
And
like, what's
it-
so
yeah.
interesting is why is that for World War One and not other?
Well,
like, why do they?
Because it was so
choose-
keenly felt in World War One. That was the
Yeah,
first.
but the thing
that
is,
changed the game.
Technically,
World War
on the-
II also changed the game, and you guys were attacked in World War
Technically,
II.
in the memorials, it is for both wars.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
is. No, that's what I said.
It's just
Yeah.
seen as more World War One, which I think is interesting because, like,
Because as Jura said, the futility of World War One. Like,
Yeah.
these guys could have gone on to be great men. They
It
could
was
have
an
gone on
entire
to.
generation.
They
of
could have gone on to
people,
change the world, yet they died
of
for a
young
needless war.
of young boys.
but I think that to me, like World War II, so many boys died fighting.
But
because
they had a cause.
to,
They-
yeah,
it
they
was-
had
it
to
was
defend their
sacrifice.
country.
See, but again, though,
It's still
both
a
of these are distinctly
sacrifice.
national viewpoints, right? And I think so. I'm coming from a position where, even if I were British, I do not think that I would choose to wear a red poppy. If anything, I would choose to wear a white poppy. One, because I think it's more inclusive. I mean, it's something that, were I to walk down the street, I would, as an American in Britain, I would feel like wearing a white poppy is something that I am entitled to do. And we can sort
course,
of
yes.
interrogate
you are, yeah.
the
Yeah.
entitlement to wear anything in sort of what is the boundary of culture, and that's another sort of discussion. But
Yeah.
but to wear a white poppy or to wear a red poppy or anything, it really is sort of an absolution of actually interrogating the reasons for anything. Like, this whole discussion is not a discussion that people have ever. This
Yeah.
is something where
Well,
for
yeah.
2 weeks leading up to Remembrance Day, we all say, check me out, I'm remembering it, I've got my poppy on my lapel.
Where's
And then
yours?
on November 12th, you set your poppy down and you stop remembering for the entire year, and you engage in the same process every year.
I think that
because
is-
you feel sort of this.
Like you have to.
You feel, well, not even, yeah, you feel like you have to, but it's not about remembrance. It's about being able to forget for the rest of the year, and I think that's the problem. It doesn't actually do anything. Wearing a red poppy
Oh, it just
doesn't
eases people's conscience.
exactly. It
Yeah.
doesn't force you to
But
interrogate
you
any
can't
of these
expect everyone
issues.
to remember for the whole year. Like, I think I mean, at least when I did the whole Psalm Ypres
Yeah.
whole thing, it wasn't drilled in, but it was noted that you're not going to be thinking about this every day, every year. Frankly, if you go to those graves and you see those sites and you see the battles, hell, you don't want to remember.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I think it's crucial that we have a small period per year, whether it's a day or a week, where we do,
And the
honour
gratitude, the
sacrifices.
gratitude of it is
The gratitude,
is
yeah,
noted.
not
Because-
just for World War One, for World War
Yeah.
Two.
Yeah,
But I think
Iraq,
the difference with that sort of
Afghanistan.
thing, like, so then that's making it into, we're remembering this terrible thing which happened, but we don't remember all terrible things which happened. We
No.
don't set aside a day for poverty. Like, we don't set aside for.
But that's what I'm so curious about is
But
that
like, it's not as like thingy, and so that's why it's not just this. We're remembering this bad thing which happened. It's this national thing which happened, and like, and,
well, it's because it happened on a national level. It's international.
Yeah.
The scale of it is unlike anything else that had ever been seen ever before in our time.
but it's
Do you
just sort of
think
like
Obviously, apart from, in Britain certainly, apart from maybe the English Civil War, in terms of
Right,
Again,
but
again,
but then it comes back,
400
like,
years ago, it's kind of losing its relevance.
But I
But then
think-
that scale, though, is still being shrunk down by the red poppy, by like, the Royal British Legion explicitly
Yeah.
saying that this is and I'm
Simple.
literally quoting from their website,
No,
that
yeah.
remembrance is a social benefit which promotes social cohesion and national unity. Like,
That's sketchy.
That is, that is the most clear evidence of this being a sort of political project that.
Panoptic.
Let's get Bentham out. Let's whip Bentham out and say,
Can't
you know
say
what,
that word, but
this
yeah.
is a panoptic project
Yes.
to make people feel
And
like
the
they
black
constantly
bit in the
have
poppies
to.
and I. Ooh. There's symbolism
Again,
there.
yeah.
Critical symbolic studies. Hit me up.
Sadly,
It's real.
the
It's real, though.
politicization of the poppy is much lamented.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think we have two things that need to happen. Unfortunately, we need to
Yeah,
slide this sword.
that debate,
Jack and Reilly, I think you guys have questions for us.
We didn't do that.
Oh,
no,
you guys
we-
didn't
yeah.
prepare a question.
Should we? Should we?
Sorry, they had a
I've got the
quiz.
script, okay.
We're
Oh,
pushed
no,
for
no,
time
no.
here, guys. We're gonna have to rattle through these.
Yeah.
We're gonna do Freak of the Week as well. God.
Yeah.
I think we can probably just swing on over to Freak of the Week.
Okay.
So it's
Slide
making
past
it.
the boys' quiz.
So it's
for
making
us.
this as much of a transition as possible, and not sort of making it off the back of the previous.
Okay, yeah.
discussion.
So I hope that 50 minutes of heavy debate has,
Oh, God, we
got
could've
you in the
gone on
mood
for
for some
longer.
light-hearted.
Freaks of the week.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to go first?
I'll kick off. Freak of the Week. I'm going to go for Sir Thomas Bloodworth, Mayor of London in 1666. Upon the early hours of the 3rd of September, when Pudding Lane had exploded and the early stages of the Great Fire of London were taking effect, he was awoken by one of his servants. He viewed the fire, commented a woman could piss it out, and then went back to sleep. 3 days later, most of London was destroyed.
Iconic.
Some people wondered whether anyone could ever live in the city again. And arguably the archaeological impact of it is still being felt to this day.
Ooh.
So yeah, nice one, Thomas. Yeah.
Nailed it.
Nice.
Okay, I'll go next. So in the theme of World War One, I did Ernest Hemingway, the writer, which we all know. So this isn't really that. I mean, it's kind of freaky. I think it's freaky. As we all know, Hemingway was really into drinking. It was a big thing
Big-
for
big
him.
hobby of his,
Though he
yeah.
didn't believe in drinking while he was writing. He thought you should be sober. He fired some shots, said only Faulkner drinks while writing. Oof, do with that what you will. But anyways, he was actually a diabetic, and so he couldn't have sugar in his drinks. So when he would drink like absinthe or like very, pure like vodka, that kind of drink, he would do it without any form, like he would just drink it straight. Just sort of drink it, which actually was also a thing under Charles the Great in Russia. But I will save that as a Freak of the Week for another time. But anyways, to quote Hemingway, I drink to make other people more interesting.
Savage.
So some heavy alcoholism, probably brought on by some trauma he withstood in World War One.
True.
Yeah,
love
love that too.
Okay. Boys.
So I've got, just an incredible man, Mr. George William Crump.
Oh.
He served in the 19th U.S. Congress. He was also a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. But aside from being a public servant, he was also an innovator. He is the first ever recorded person to streak across a college campus.
Good.
And of course, this
Iconic.
campus was Washington College, later to
When
become.
was this?
This was 1804. He is.
Wow.
Wow.
Ahead of his time.
He
a
really
true
thought of it
innovator,
all.
public servant, and streaker. Amazing.
Dream.
Amazing.
Get you a man like
what
that.
What a man. Wow.
So my guy, Gregor Mac McGregor, great name. So he started out as a soldier, and then when he returned to Europe in 1820, he launched this audacious money-making scheme. And again, following on from this innovatory.
Where was Gregor
Oh,
from?
no.
Was he a Scottish man?
Yeah, let's go with Scottish. In St Andrews, in fact, he was.
Okay.
I'm not getting angry.
So what he does, he launches this scheme by announcing that while in the tropics, he'd made up this place called Poipet. Just this made-up country. He makes up this random country
Somewhere in the tropics.
okay. And then gets people to start paying him for land there. And he basically and it just gets wildly out of control. And
That's
he becomes
genius.
and he
Oh my
makes his
God.
fortune from it. And then all these people get quite angry because they realise.
Yeah, he must have gone
Does
spent
he
quite
flee
a
the
long
country?
time
What does he
inside.
do?
I'd
How does
imagine.
how does he get out of that?
Well, I mean,
Not
that's
entirely
fraud,
sure
that's
about
fraud,
that.
isn't it? I'm pretty sure you can go to jail for that.
It's a bit. It's a bit.
I mean, that
it's
is
a bit
fraud.
You
fraud,
should have spent quite a lot of
To
time
say the
inside.
least.
But yeah.
But yeah, Gregor McGregor.
Maybe send him back to the tropics on his fake island.
Nietzsche's sister actually did the exact same thing. Interestingly enough, she and her
Who's?
husband,
Nietzsche.
Friedrich Nietzsche, his sister did the exact same thing, and it was called like I forget the name. It was like New Portugal or something or another.
New Portugal.
And she was like, "Yeah, everyone come over," and it just like it was meant to be a really nationalistic territory, and it just did not work. And
Did-
she got-
Well,
Did the Lehman Brothers do that 2008? What?
what?
I mean,
Capitalism.
this
So
does.
How long
it's
you-
a
how
real
long you got
historical
there?
thing. Everyone does it.
This does bring up the fact that
Next week's
I
episode.
wanted to advertise to everyone that I am selling plots of land in Tiftistan.
Where, sorry?
Tiftistan.
Tiftistan.
Tiftistan, yeah, very nice, very
I hear it's lovely around this time of year.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I've already got mine.
My grandma has a house there, actually. I go and visit her in the summer. I would recommend it highly. Shorus?
I guess mine to finish, to bring it back to the theme, was Manfred von Richthofen,
That's a name.
Beautifully said.
better known as
That itself is a freak of the week.
Yeah, that, yep.
better known as the Red Baron, the ace of aces, 80 confirmed kills as a pilot during World War One. So known because he was in fact a baron, and he painted his airplane red. So,
Should
yeah.
we really be glorifying him, killing
Yeah.
those people?
I-
Now
Probably
that
not.
is a fun question.
Oh,
The
and
term
we'll have to discuss it
Again, if we had another hour.
another time when the
In
boys
terms
are
of-
here.
in terms of skill, it was freakish. So,
Oh, I like that.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Good save there, Shorus.
You nailed it, Shorey.
so anyway,
Poster him up in my room.
thank you so much everyone for listening
No,
this
thank
week.
you. Thanks to our guests.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having us. It was a blast.
And we will be back same time next week, same place. Have a good week, everyone. And to play you out, we'll play you one of the defining songs from 1939.
We'll meet again